My name is Jeff Evanson. I work at the Canadian Urban Institute. We are the neutral third-party facilitators of this process. And for many of you who have participated in this process, you will know that this is the third public meeting of this process. In the first meeting, we asked you what you'd like to see going on down there at 1 Port Street. In the second meeting, we asked our design team to begin to give form to that function, and we received your comments in return. We have taken what you told us, and we have gone away. The design team has gone away, and they have worked up basically 11 strategies for the master plan and a demonstration plan, which, as an example, puts those strategies into a context and gives you more specificity to kind of understand how these strategies might work when things are built up. So this is the third meeting, the final meeting of this process, and what we will do is bring you a presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity to discuss elements of that conversation. But now that we're all quiet down and in our seats, I'd like to ask Councillor Jim Toby to just come forward and give you a welcome.
Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming. It's great to see so many people engaged in the future of our community. One thing I will note that I would like to note is that, and I'd really like to compliment the proponent here for really doing really going out of the way and doing an awful lot of community consultation, because that's really what we're all about here in Mississauga, particularly in Mississauga South, as we know. But one thing that is very clear is that after this process is completed, then of course we have to go through the entire city process. So there's going to be a lot more consultation on this further on down the road. I would like to make one quick announcement though. I'm very pleased to announce that we finally, I just received word that we've secured money in the budget this year to dredge the Port Credit Harbor. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you. It actually hasn't been dredged since the Port Credit Yacht Club moved in 1996, and it really should be done every 7 years. So it was one of the big things on my bucket list, and I'm really glad we got it done. We've got about 6 months of environmentals to do on that. And then I imagine after the salmon run, we'll be dredging the harbor, and I think that'll be much better for putting the port back in port credit, as we like to say. So have a great evening, get creative, and let's see what we come up with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So I just want to, so you understand who's in the room, I'd like to just first introduce the Canada Lands team that's in the room. At the back is James Cox, Alison Pritchard, Roger Martin, Roger, and Manon Lampasse. Not here today? Okay. The consultants, part of the design team that you will be interacting with in each of these three areas, but they're in the room. Joe Logpo from the architect team, Chris Barrett from the architect team, Mark Conway from Barry Lyon Consultants, Milo Sturm from Shoreplan Engineering, Alan Lloyd and Emily Ecker from PA, the Transportation Consultants, and Lorelei Jones, the Planning Consultant. Also, members of the CUI Facilitation team, Alexandra McDonough, is
Here.
just at the back here. Again, my name is Jeff Evanson, and we are ably assisted this evening by student volunteers and interns from Ryerson School of Planning. Just want to, I think you saw them when you came in. They're still hard at work. What I'd like to ask now is if Ruth Marlin here would just come up and explain to you how this process integrates with another very important process going on in Port Credit right now, Inspiration Port Credit.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everybody. Inspiration Port Credit is a City Mississauga-led exercise. We are evaluating our two strategic waterfront sites, being the CLC site and Imperial Oil. And because CLC is doing their own master plan, we are then looking at the connections to the community for this site and our other city priorities around this site being waterfront parks, waterfront trail connections, the LRT. That is the scope of that project. With respect to our ongoing work evaluating CLC, we have been conducting what's called a peer review. So our consultant for Inspiration Port Credit has been, and along with the Mississauga staff, talking to Canada Lands throughout this process, and Canada Lands have been very helpful in the information they've been sharing with us and with you, because you've seen the results of our discussion on their website. So we certainly appreciate the information sharing and the opportunity for us to learn more about things like marina operations. So that process will continue and culminate in a master plan document prepared by Canada Lands, which will then be shared with the city. We will review it in the context of our Inspiration Port Credit process, and our process will come to conclusion, we anticipate, in June of this year. So the results of the peer review will culminate at that time. And concurrently then, as I indicated, we're also studying Imperial Oil, so we are looking at options for land use there. And we have a public meeting coming up where the options will be shared, and the review of Canada Lands with respect to the priorities that I spoke of will be shared, and that's March 26th, 6:30 at Clark Hall, presentation at 7. And if you're on our website, we'll be happy to email you that information, or please leave me your email tonight, and we'll be happy to make sure you get that information. So that's the city process that Councillor Toby spoke about, and again, thank you to Canada Lands.
Thanks very much, Ruth. So what we're going to do is tonight we're going to have a presentation for about 45 minutes, as I said a bit earlier, on the 11 strategies that comprise the master plan, and then a kind of demonstration, which is how those strategies might be put into practice. It's not the way it's going to be, but it does give you a sense of how that might work. Joe's going to give you that presentation. Then after that, we're going to have an opportunity for an hour to discuss what you've seen. And I'll explain at the end how that's going to work, but essentially, you're going to stay in each of these three sections, and then the design team and the city experts and the facilitators are going to move to each section. So you're going to have 3 20-minute conversations about 3 different topics, and we think that will cover off all of the major issues. But it's meant to be interactive. It's meant to be really interesting and compelling, not just a one-way kind of conversation. It's a real opportunity to explore what the thinking that has gone into this plan that Joe's going to present to you. So without any more talking on my part, Joe Lobco.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeff, for introducing us all. So it's a pleasure to be here again. I was saying to somebody earlier, from the perspective of an architect, an urban designer, and part-time landscape architect, it's a privilege to get to work on such a special place. So let's get right at it. There is a slide here that speaks to the process that Ruth described. I'm not going to get into it and repeat what she's talked about, but there are parallel processes that feed into ultimately municipal approval process. That's the main thing that you need to understand is, thank you, Chris. Ultimately, this is going to go through a city approval process. Another thing to maybe...
Can you speak up, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes. Sure. I have the sense, you see, I'm into sort of kind of it's a game show, and there's 3 teams that are about to compete, so I'm kind of intimidated by that. Bear with me. The CLC's role in Port Credit. CLC is helping to facilitate the planning framework for this site and putting the steps in place to enable this project to move along. But they will not be the final builder or developer. They will engage a partner in the course of time to come in and actually develop this project in partnership. That this project, therefore, will be subject to further specific development applications with that development partner down the road. So the broad strokes to understand is that what we're working at here is a master plan framework. That means it's really about the vision overall. It's big picture. What do we want to happen here? We're going to give you a suggestion tonight, and we're looking forward to your feedback. But there's a lot of detail. We're going to get into some of that detail tonight, but there's a lot more detail to come. Everything isn't figured out, but we want to put a vision on the table for your consideration. I want to go through these master plan objectives one at a time, but I'll be quick about them. A model, sustainable, and creative community on the Port Credit waterfront. Something that enhances the existing urban village character, that brings year-round life. That's a key part of it. What happens in the winter here? That we're going to create great public places. That's a key objective. That we need to build a range of building forms, build mixed use at an appropriate scale. That we need to keep the port in Port Credit, and a lot of people have ideas about what that means. That this has to be a place for employment, not just for play and not just for living. That it has to respond to all of its history, all of its context, all of its opportunities, that we're very sensitive to all of those things, and that we make it a better place to be along the waterfront than it already is, and it's already not a bad place to be. So in terms of the vision, a place to live, work, and play, with direct and public access to the water, strong waterfront character, pedestrian focus, integrated into the community. And if I zoom out, because I think this is in some ways the most important part of the evening, is the way we have come to imagine this place. It's a great and unique waterfront village at the mouth of the Credit River, focused around an active marina. And that's the vision. The vision is not to take a place that's already pretty active and already has a lot of livelihood and displace that. But the vision is to keep that in place and bring more. And can we, in fact, do that and pull it all together? So that's the vision that we're bringing forward for your consideration. We brought forward to you in the last meeting a lot of things from the external design influences that we're considering. Certainly the street pattern. We want to connect to the community. So that's a very strong part of it. How do we do that? Court Street is an important east-west link. There are bike paths and pedestrian paths that end on our east and end on our west and need to be linked through this site. And of course, we're at a very unique physical point in Port Credit. And so it's the acknowledgement of all that that's really key. With respect to our internal influences, you'll recall my talking about the original shoreline, where you have native soil conditions, I'll call it, versus a fill condition, where you've got lots of fill material at very different kind of foundation conditions. Excuse me. Not nearly as easy to put sort of underground parking structures in, for example, and there are some environmental issues. We also have dock walls, we have an existing building, we have an existing marina that operates in a certain way, and we have a level change from portions of Port Street down into the site. So those are all other things that we need to consider. As has already been described, the first part of this presentation is reviewing with you what we think the key components of the master plan are. So what are the key elements that give life to this vision? And then we're going to demonstrate a couple of ways that these master plan strategies can be borne out. We're going to talk about street connections, views to the water, a waterfront trail, parks and plazas, marine and marina uses, Port Street, internal connections, land use, built form, a public realm framework, and sustainability. So those are the categories under which we've put our thoughts together. So some of this you've seen before, and some of this is new. So the first imperative is to connect streets. So Stave Bank, Elizabeth, and Elaine all need to be connected into the site. The north-south connections are vital. How does this become an extension of the community, not separate from it? A very important objective. That comes along with views. So if you're up on Lakeshore, you're not going to have impeded views to the waterfront. Everybody wants to see the water. And that works in that direction. So from the land side, it's those views through. But they're also east-west. There are great views in the east-west direction once you come down here. It's important to think about those things both ways. A very perhaps obvious thing is that currently the site is not accessible to the public. And so an early and important objective is to bring the public through along the water's edge, so there's a continuous water's edge promenade from the east to the west, and it becomes part of a network along the waterfront. That's a very important objective, and with the dash line, there's lots of places for shortcuts along that route. So there's a network that's formed. That these different waterfront conditions we have on this site are not all the same. They're very different, and they need to be each treated differently. So we've identified 4 characteristics. What we call the North Promenade, where Elizabeth comes down and meets the water. What we're calling Wharfside, which is between the current shed and the water's edge and the dock wall. That's what we're calling Wharfside for the moment. The South Promontory, that space at the end, the south end of the site, with fabulous views out into the open lake. That's a special spot in and of itself. And then currently the frontage to Plouse Park, which may feel like a back at the moment, but we feel could become a very positive front. So those are different characteristics we think the planning of this site needs to address. And I'm going to walk through each of them a little bit, and I'll give you a sense of the flavor we're thinking about for each of them. The North Promenade, a place that's got water on one side, buildings on the other. You've got some experience of that further to the east, and you can see in the key plan where each of these kind of locations would be. So that's just a kind of cartoon cross-section of what that might be like. In actual terms, it might be something like this. This is just an example of the kind of tree-lined, very public, very generous, ideally beautiful place to walk for the public along the waterfront. Along the wharf side, between the shed and the current dock wall, there's a dimension of about 15 meters. That's a pretty reasonable, generous dimension for those of you who have been there. There's lots of things that can go along. You see the tie back in this detail. This is Nyhavn in Copenhagen. I presented this to you the last time we were together as one example of a wharfside place that just turns out to have the exact same dimension as the shed to dock wall dimension here. So a generous public space for lots of different activity to go on. The South Promontory, again, refer to the key plan, a place for a park, a place for a little more distance, a place for some views in numbers of directions, a place of destination maybe where there's some activity all year round in a public park kind of setting, and a place you'll see where bicycles can move through with pedestrians in a safe and relaxed manner. We're not talking about a dedicated bike trail with guys zooming, racing through, but we're talking about a place which is pedestrian first, which welcomes bikes, where cars are welcomed as well, but everybody's going at a slower pace. That's an important part of the vision we have for this place. An important combination of parks and plazas. So at the end of every street, at the end of Elizabeth Street, a new public place, a marine plaza. And we're going to show you a couple of different ways we're thinking about that. At the end of Helene, a place that again could be handled in a couple of different ways, and we're going to show you that. But in both cases, public access point, something to arrive at. At the end of Stave Bank, maybe an extension of Plouse Park or a new park, a new destination to come and touch the water. All of these things are important, and it's important that they become interconnected. This is the one diagram is from the waterfront park strategy of Mississauga. The diagram we've done, the smaller one, shows that green connection so that there's a missing link in the park system at the moment. And through this project, that link can be fulfilled, and we can get a continuous green link between existing waterfront areas. To continue along through some of these spaces, Marine Plaza, this is a cross-section looking east with Port Street in the left-hand side of it, with some new development proposed on its north flank, the Ports Hotel, for example, and the Waterside Hotel, shown in profile. The No Frills development also shown in profile. And then to the right, the extension of Elizabeth Street down to the water. There's a short dimension there when you come to Elizabeth Street. You get to the water fast. It's an immediate kind of realization of being at the water's edge. And it could be something like this. This is a photograph of Granville Island and Falls Creek in Vancouver, a place where boats and people and occasionally vehicles mix, where there's a lot of varied activity. It feels very marine, but it feels very public at the same time. Elaine Point and Pebble Beach, a variety of things could take place here. Maybe it's a place where people can touch the water a little more immediately, a place to gather and take in some sun. Maybe it's a beach. There's some interesting versions of beaches emerging around the world these days. Maybe it's a place where you can literally walk into the water, or launch a kayak or launch a canoe. And in cross-section, it may be a place where there's an opportunity, as I say, to come off a high spot and come down to the water just conceptually. Promontory Park being a place where you're out at you've come for a Sunday walk, for example, and you just want to take in that expansive view of the lake. And you want a little bit of park space around you, and you want to enjoy it in the company of your neighbors. There's already a park down here. It could become a better park. There could be more park. So that's part of our thinking with respect to a destination down here. And we'll have a couple of more examples of that. So a place with some breathing space at the water's edge is the idea. And that can accommodate this kind of activity as well as all kinds of activity. So diversity is key. Welcoming as many people doing as many things is key. That's an important part of the success on many levels. And that includes the people that are already there. So the folks that live and use and work and enjoy the marina and the marine use and the employment derived from the marine uses are an important aspect of the history and ongoing vitality of this place. There are berths and boats and launch facilities and a range of marine services, and certainly we've heard a lot about how important this industry is and how valuable the services are that they provide to the boating community in this part of the GTA. What you're seeing here in the diagram is what we call the central marina variant. So the marina at the moment operates, well, many of you will know how it operates, where boats go in and out of the water. I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 slips present. There's a very large shed. Boats are repaired, boats are painted, as I understand it. I'm assuming boats were certainly made here historically, and they may continue to be, and others in the room will know more about that than I will. But in this variation, that marina operation fundamentally stays as it is, and we have to adjust circumstances to make it continue to work. We've also thought about a variant to that, which we're going to describe a little more, and that would be to go to the breakwater on the other side and effectively organize a marina off the breakwater. The shed is still dashed in this diagram. It would be at the head of Helene Street as opposed to at the foot of Helene Street as opposed to the foot of Elizabeth Street. And there could be facilities organized with the widening of that breakwater that could accommodate marina activity in a different way, and we'll get into those differences. In either case, once we welcome the public to a site that's currently not open to the public, we have to deal with the realities and practicalities of continuing to operate a marina and everything that's entailed with that and marine uses, and welcome the public through. There are examples around the world where these things coexist. We have to learn from them. It's not that there aren't challenges there. There certainly are. It's not that every aspect and every detail has been thought through, but we think there's a way to make it all work. And part of it is about public wharves and private gangways. Part of it is about creating shared zones and dealing with specific circumstances and times of the year when different activities go on. This is, again, an example of Granville Island in Vancouver, a very public place with very intense marine activity and a marina activity, all of which have to find a way to work it out together safely. In one variation where the marina stays where it is, the point of conflict, that ellipse, the point where the public wants to come through and boats want to move around is described there. There could be a time where the diagram on the left, a diagram of normal public movement, the diagram on the right, a diagram of public movement, when there's boat activity in a square that's made large enough to accommodate that boat activity of moving in and out. In the other variant that I described, and I don't have a separate diagram from that, that conflict is not avoided entirely, but it's addressed in a way where the waterfront walk comes along and marine activity happens south of it, and potentially. Now, there could still be public access out of breakwater, and all of that is, all of those things are possibilities. We're aware of a key point of sensitivity, certainly amongst the boating community, which is the issue of on-site boat storage. So in the fullness of time, as this site evolves, we're imagining that that boat storage is going to have to be handled elsewhere. And a test of the vision that we're presenting to you tonight is that that is a valid assumption and that that can be made to work, and I'm sure there'll be some conversation about that tonight. And we're also going to show you some implementation diagrams that will give you a sense of the way in which we imagine this will unfold and the way in which things can transition. We're certainly aware of other marinas in southern Ontario, substantial marinas that operate without on-site boat storage, but we're also aware of how critical boat storage is to a marina operation. So we're cognizant of all that, not suggesting all the solutions are there, but this land is very valuable, and there's more potential on this land, we believe, than remaining boats for boat storage indefinitely. We no doubt will have lots of conversation about that. Again, I stress, the idea is to bring more life to this place, not displace the life that's there. And so that's what makes this place unique and special. So for us to drive away the marina and the marine uses would be counterproductive in terms of giving this place the unique character that history's provided to us. Port Street is a very important element of this master plan. It is beyond the bounds of our project. Our client's property, of course, has a property line, but we have an address on Port Street. It currently has kind of two parts to it, an east end and a west end, and they're kind of different at the moment. There's a vision for bringing transit to Port Street that the municipality is working on, and that's going through a process that you're aware of and is running in parallel to this. This is an image provided to us by the officials working on the transit line to come down Port. We've also worked on some transit connections. We strongly believe in what we call complete streets. That means as streets get transformed and as transit is brought to those streets become beautiful places. They're about transit, they're about bikes, they're about pedestrians, they're about cars, but there has to be a place for everybody, and they have to be beautiful addresses. That these are not negative spaces, they could be intimate spaces, and we want to create great streets. So we're interested in Port Street becoming a great street, and that's a very important aspect of what I'll describe to you in the demonstration plan. So Port Street is going to have a variety of cross-sectional conditions. It already has some taller buildings on the north side. It has some lower buildings on the south side. Hopefully it will become tree-lined, and as transit arrives, that is integrated into the design in a really positive manner. Our seventh strategy has to do with the internal connections on the site. And again, I want to come back to our first principle is pedestrian priority. This is a dead end. It's not a way you're going to go through to get to another destination. So this is a place you're coming to, you're living here, you're working here, you want to play here. Hopefully you're not in a rush. And whether you're walking, you're biking, or you're coming by car, or you're coming by transit, that everything about this place is coded to communicate. Everybody's got to get along, mix in these streets, and in places like this, the cars have to be very differential to everybody else, but they're also welcome. And there are examples now around the world and in the GTA where this has become successful. We've examined more than one pattern of how to develop a local street network. The site is large. As I recall, somebody's going to correct me, 17 to 18 hectares, I believe. Got it? So in this diagram, with the asterisk pointing out, say, where the hub of the marina might be, for argument's sake, you're seeing a fairly straightforward pattern where a stave bank comes straight down to the bottom and loops back up and around, and there's a network of east-west connectivity of modest, intimately scaled streets that connect. Possibly in this example, Marine Plaza is a pedestrian zone with the occasional vehicular use, largely related to marina operations and service vehicles. And cars can come in and head a lane, but they have a dead end. It's basically a parking access. And so those are just pedestrian access points. So that's one way we've thought about it. Another, and this goes along with the marina variant on the other side, but I would say these patterns are not tied to the marina. these patterns of road patterns are interchangeable. This is another pattern where we create a new east-west connection at the head of the slip, connected with Elizabeth, connected with the lane, and connected with State Bank. It's kind of straightforward, and it's just kind of a simple pattern that organizes the site and organizes a series of public spaces. Examples of what those streets might be like. So walkable, bikeable, friendly, built of good materials, green, lots of interaction at the ground plane, and I'm going to come and talk about that a little more. A mixed-use district. So we've heard a lot on this theme, and we believe it ourselves, that this should not become a privatized area. It needs to be very public. It needs to have diverse uses. That means people do work here, and not only the people that already work here, but other people with different skills and different objectives come and work here as well. And in addition to people living here. So one of the thoughts is to balance the concern about it feeling like a privatized realm. So if you imagine 3-story townhouses across this entire site, those would be very expensive townhouses, and you'd be going down residential streets, you'd be coming into somebody's neighborhood, and you very much feel that. So we were sensitive to the ground plane, but the ground plane in particular needed to feel public. So what we're suggesting is that the ground plane across the site have tall ceilings, have accessibility at the ground plane, and have a wide range of uses allowable under zoning, so that we encourage as much as possible artisanal uses, live-work uses, studios, an exercise shop, all kinds of things that might happen in here that can give life to the ground plane and make it feel welcome to those that aren't living here or aren't working here, but who have come down for a visit, come down to the park, come down to get a meal at a restaurant, whatever it is they've come down to do, that they feel public. They don't feel that they've invaded a private residential neighborhood, but they've come to a public place where people are doing a lot of things, but they're also welcome. So coming along with that is the notion of some frontages. For example, a western frontage facing Close Park with a new extension of State Bank that receives afternoon sun and could have a restaurant at its base that overlooks the park, a restaurant at the end, or a coffee shop, that kind of thing. So different kinds of uses. What kinds of uses should front Court Street, for example? It's probably not a residential use right at grade if we have an intimate relationship with the streetcar, but we want to allow for a broad range of uses. So that's a key aspect of what we're thinking about. By the way, the amount of square footage on the ground plane of the demonstration plan I'll show you would allow for a great deal of room for a lot of those kinds of uses. We don't mean a shopping center. We don't mean something that competes with Lakeshore Road. We mean something that complements and is appropriate to this extension of the community, and that probably needs a lot more discussion. These kinds of things. Maybe somebody already does build kayaks here, I don't know, or build sailboats, but that kind of thing can certainly happen and continue to happen. With respect to built form, another critical element of the master plan, we showed you an example in San Francisco last time we were here called Mission Creek. There are 4- and 6-story buildings here and a range of other scales. There's a large piece of water on the south side of San Francisco Bay that comes in here near the baseball stadium. What you're noticing on the right is an image of what it feels like from the, in this case, a walkway along the water, where it has an impression of a 4-story street wall, but behind, as you can see in the other image, it's actually 6 to 7 stories. So what we're promoting is what we call a mid-rise built form as a base throughout this development of a 4 to 6-story scale, and that gives you intimately and we think reasonably well scaled streets and allows for a balance of density and interesting units as they step back above. That there are a series of important public frontages that the buildings basically define and give form and shape and life to these public spaces. The Wharfside Walk, an internal street, a park, a marine plaza. Those places are defined and enlivened, if you will, by these buildings and coming back again to that ground floor that accommodates a range of uses. We are proposing some additional height along Court Street where we have deeper soil conditions and where we think the built form appropriately can have more variety. We'll come back and talk about that a little more as well. If I was to do an east-west cross-section through the site, from Close Park on the left and the mouth of the Credit River, through the extension of State Bank to what we're imagining are two development blocks going south. But the width of the wharf, if you will, is about 2 blocks wide. So that's what we're illustrating here, with an internal street in the middle, and then a wharf side on the east side with Marine Plaza in the distance. And you're seeing a range of heights in that distance as well. If you came to a typical street condition, for example, that north-south internal street, this is the kind of logic of the cross-section that would inform the build form that we're proposing. So this notion of a 4-story street wall, taller ground floor, stepped back above, so that you allow sun penetration into these streets, so that we have sun-filled streets with an appropriate scale that makes rational development and makes interesting places. And we have some illustrations and perspectives to follow to help you understand this. This is a height map we're proposing for your consideration. Again, it's a 4 to 6 story height regime proposed throughout the entire development, with occasional points of height along Port Street, but those occasional points of height, their footprint would be controlled. So that as you go higher than 6 stories, in very limited places, the scale of the building is reduced, so it doesn't dominate the skyline, it doesn't have a big environmental impact, and always step back from base buildings, so we're not bringing winds to the ground. All of those things have to be considered in the disposition of built form. And when you put all that together as an overall public framework, you've got an address on Court Street, you've got public spaces that you arrive at the foot of State Bank, Elizabeth, and Elaine, a Marine Plaza, Elaine Point, and maybe a new park or an extension of Close Park at the bottom. You have a wharf side that surrounds the shed that's there now and gives life to all that activity, and you have a pattern of internal streets and a park frontage. So that's the kind of mix of strategies that we think is adding up to a master plan vision here. With respect to sustainability, there's a number of themes that come across. One is, and first and foremost, is social and cultural, that this becomes a great extension to the community that adds value to the community. That is a key aspect of sustainability. This really works and brings value to the community in all kinds of ways, and that there are public enhancements that come as a result of this project. That intensification effectively means that this has to make financial sense. So that these great new public spaces and new places for people to come at a cost, but that cost has to be balanced with development potential, and that development potential has to be balanced against the planning objectives and the character and shape of the community as it is now and as it wants to be. So financial and economic sustainability becomes key, that the place works long term. And then, of course, there's a range of environmental matters that we would want to address, certainly dealing with resource management, water, energy, all kinds of things. There's all sorts of possibility of making this a great model community at the waterfront. I'm going to walk you through a demonstration plan. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time.
You have 20 minutes.
Thank you. So I'm going to walk you through 2 variants. So what you're seeing here are site plans that we've created in sketch form. You can see where and this is in the fullness of time. And I'm going to come back and show you an implementation strategy that is conjecture, but demonstrate that this isn't happening in 2 or 3 years. This is happening over 1 to 2 decades. So I'll come back and describe that. So the shed building's a telltale in terms of people looking at the map. You can or the site plan, you can see where that is in this site plan. And you can see a kind of block structure we're suggesting, and the 2 variants of marina. One, where the marina, the berth access would be off what we call the wharf side, adjacent to the shed building. And the marina variant, where the marina berths are accessed off the breakwater. And so the marina would change, and there could be a different way of ending Port Street. And those, again, are interchangeable ideas. They're not necessarily tied. We're just trying different things out. But we think it's important that at the bottom of Elizabeth Street, there's some kind of public space. Whether it's made up just as you get through that Port Street threshold, or whether it's something that greets you at the end. Down at the Central Waterfront, we've done what are called a series of wave decks. And they're at places along Queens Quay Boulevard in Toronto where the street is very tight. There's no room for bikes and pedestrians and cars and streetcars. It's too tight. So we've essentially extended a big wooden deck, a serious public space deck that goes out in a few places that creates much more generous public space at a point at the water. So there are a variety of ways in which to do it. we're just suggesting there be a public place at the end of Elizabeth, and it might work in different ways depending on the marina configuration that results. So let me walk through a few aspects of this plan. First of all, there's a couple of different road patterns or street patterns. Let me describe it as street as opposed to road, because road implies it's only about cars. And again, I want to emphasize the aspect of this being a great place to go for a stroll, any time of year, any time of day. So the dark red line are vehicular patterns, potential vehicular patterns. One thing to say is that we want at least 2 points of access to Port Street. It's important to have choice and not to be reliant on just one point of access in however we do it, and we're very cognizant of that. In the pattern on the right, which again is tied at the moment with the Eastern Marina variant, you see a fairly simple kind of grid where there are just different connection points to Elizabeth Lane and Stave Bank and a loop internally. The access along the wharf would still be available to service vehicles, people that needed access for marine uses, all of that kind of thing, but they're otherwise pedestrian-friendly zones. Bikes certainly are, I would suspect, over this next decade, you're going to see a lot more bikes through Port Credit. You probably have seen a lot more in the last while, and you want to welcome more, and so we have to find a way to bring them through. There's a primary corridor for bikes along Lakeshore, but there need to be informal ways for bikes to move east-west across the community. And so we want to work with everybody to find ways to accommodate that bike movement. But as I said earlier, through this site and through a waterfront trail, on a wharf-side condition, it doesn't become one of those dedicated bike paths where people are racing. It's got to be mixed traffic, everybody behaves and respects one another. So bike connections throughout are very key. The scale of some of the spaces we're demonstrating, we just want to give you a sense of the scale. So this is one thought about Marine Plaza at the foot of Elizabeth, 35 meters in the north-south direction, about 60 in the east-west direction. If you look at it the other way, a space that becomes about 140 meters in the east-west and about 35 meters deep. These are just the way we've illustrated it. There's nothing fixed or specific about this, but just to give you a sense of public space dimensions as we're moving through. 50 meters by 25 meters, so 50 meters about half the length of a soccer field, 50 meters being the width of a soccer field, plus or minus. Helene Point, if it became a marina instead, there could be a kind of a landfill operation here where there's places for vehicles to move, places for the public to come through if the Eastern Breakwater became a public access point, so there was a walkout to the end. That might be a possibility that could emerge through this project development. Promontory Park, something like 60 meters wide, 100 meters long, not dissimilar in scale from Celebration Square south of City Hall at scale. And we've got some perspective views to help you understand the scale of that. The waterfront LRT station that's proposed, currently the city plans we're aware show the station itself being in Port Street. We're concerned about that solution because we're concerned that Port Street will become very wide and comes back to that vision we have about a beautiful Port Street that accommodates a range of things. We welcome transit, understand the benefits of transit, understand that everybody may not agree about transit coming down Port Street, and that's going to be discussed in other forums and decided by others. But from our perspective, and candidly for our 2 cents worth, if transit's going to come, we'd like to suggest that it come around and land in Plouse Park. We are suggesting that for a couple of reasons. We think we get a better Port Street, and by we, I mean everybody gets a better Port Street, that you'll get a more beautiful street. And then we think it's a beautiful thing to think about landing with a streetcar station in the park, that you arrive at Port Credit's waterfront. We've done a diagram. So first of all, the idea of combining LRT and park spaces, there's lots of precedents for that around the world. We've done a diagram to show how we believe you could reduce the scale of the parking space in the Plouse Park that's there now, and replace that parking with street parking on the extension of Stave Bank we're proposing. Reconfigure Stave Bank so it comes within the CLC property. Therefore, the portion of it now that provides access to that restaurant is eliminated. And where that space is, we bring a streetcar loop in and land it in Plouse Park. We think that becomes a great arrival point, a great destination. And And we think we actually can add more green space to the park as a result of this combination of things. So it's not a loss of green space. And we don't tighten the throat where bikes and pedestrians are moving north out of Close Park and going back towards Lakeshore. So that's just something we'd like everybody to consider, and we're interested in your thoughts about that. This is just a diagram, a cross-section through the extension of Stave Bank showing a certain kind of street right-of-way. So buildings, again, the higher ground floor use, opportunity for cafes and so forth on the west flank, generous sidewalk, a place for cars to go two ways, a place for some street parking, sidewalk on the other side, landscape zone, and then LRT station, and then the park. That's the kind of way we're seeing it in cross-section. And as you come south, the LRT station drops out, and you get a residential buildings with a park frontage overlooking Stave Bank. The middle streets, again, that same, we're proposing an 18-meter width. So again, that proportion of that section really matters to us. We want it to allow sun in, we want enough height to give it a certain kind of character, and I'll demonstrate that through a perspective view. When you put all that together, this is an aerial view from the north, west, looking southeast, with the marina in its current configuration. And what you're seeing is a range of built form, 4 to 6 stories high, stepped back as it rises. And you can see a range of building architecture. So with each site, there could be a different response to that condition. Buildings don't have to be cookie cutter. They can work within the same set of rules, but provide a diversity of experience, a diversity of character, a diversity of form. You're seeing some higher height elements along Port Street. In this case, you're seeing an illustration of a 14-story tower that's offset from the hotel that we're in. You're seeing some 8-story elements on either side of Elizabeth Street. And the idea of that is that we would provide some, or suggest some flexibility with the disposition of higher elements along Port Street, and the specifics of that are to be determined through a much more detailed design process. It would have to be supported in a number of ways. If we do the marina variant, we've just illustrated what that might look like. So what you're seeing here now is at the foot of the lane, a landing spot that's a little larger. Its precise size to be determined through more study, but a place that could accommodate marina operations and potentially provide access to slips that are coming off the breakwater rather than off the wharf side. And a different notion of marine plaza in the foreground. You're also noticing the shed being illustrated differently in this illustration. And again, that could happen in a variety of ways. These are independent ideas that could cross-fertilize from one scheme to another. So maybe the shed is at the bottom, lower at the south, so it's a lower height. Maybe there's a cut made through the shed, so there's a public way through to connect east and west. You know, maybe the shed is a combination of marine uses and other uses. There's lots of possibilities of how to organize things around a fairly simple framework, and that's kind of the fundamental message that we're thinking about. If we're up in the air to the southeast, looking back at the community, the kind of impression that one might get if you're a hang glider. The kind of impression you might get from Saddington Park across the way in Plaza Park. Remember, there are a fair number of trees in Plaza Park at the moment. So there's a fairly green edge when you're looking at it. This is a photograph that we've just inserted a model into across from Saddington Park. If you're in a sailboat, of course, it always looks wonderful. Along the North Promenade, it might start to look like this, so that as you're coming from the east, it might be a tree alley, an alley of trees, cutting right across, right to the mouth of the to the Credit River. So if you look down that distance, there's nothing in its way. You get a visual connection right through to the river on the other side, and Helene Point to your left. Along the wharf side, this kind of life might be there. Whether it's the shed's a very big building. It has lots of stuff at the edges. It already has a lot of uses at the edges. It can provide lots of animation, as could new buildings. They can both provide that kind of character. The extension of Stave Bank, just as you come south of Port Street, and in our vision, to the right you're seeing the streetcar station land in Close Park. You see the extension of Stave Bank within CLC property currently, with a view to the water, and land at a place down there. Land at another deck, land at a special place to get down to the water. Something special that greets you when you get down to the end. Maybe there's some cafes along that frontage that you can see here, a place to have a coffee, a place to have a meal, and there are people living and working above and along the ground plane. When you're coming to the foot of Elizabeth, that's what it looks like now, and it could be opened up to a lake view with buildings that start to frame that view. At the foot of the lane is kind of what it looks like now, not modified a lot, but buildings that start to frame that view. And as many of you will know, there is a development site on the east side of the lane as well. A view of the internal street that we're suggesting. So this is the kind of scale and character. The appearance of a 4-story street wall, 6-story setback, ground plane that can be a variety of things, and a place that's friendly for bikes, friendly for cars, friendly for people, and is green. A park at the end that could accommodate activity. Water play in the summer, maybe skating in the winter. To be designed, we're not presuming that we've designed the park, but some kind of park down there that accommodates, that's a destination. That's welcome to everybody, not just those that already live here or already work here, but it's open to the broader community. So, getting to the end now, folks, let me sort of suggest a conjecture about some phasing and implementation. So we don't have a magic wand to know exactly how this might unfold. If everybody thought this should happen and we all agreed, how would this unfold and over what period of time? So that's subject to a lot of different conditions. But nevertheless, try this on. 2 to 4 years after the project's been approved, and that's not the end of this process, that's the end of a subsequent process that actually approves the project. This is simply putting a kind of planning framework in place. Perhaps the development is started on Court Street, east of Elizabeth, and there's an extension of a Water's Edge Promenade that's begun. Maybe, in fact, we are able to get full public access all the way around the shed building early on in the life of the project. It may not be developed or finished in its final form, but we find a way to get public access through early in the process without the whole thing being developed. The marina uses and their needs have to be understood. The public needs would have to be integrated into that. Again, other places have done it. We think it could be managed. Perhaps 4 to 6 years after planning and development approvals, you continue moving development along Court Street. So where the soil is deeper and where you've got firmer ground, so to speak, you might continue development along there. 6 to 8 years later, you might start coming down the west side of the site and start to give frontage to Close Park. Maybe the transit is arriving in that period of time, and somebody from the city might have a smile on their face about that. Perhaps 8 to 10 years after approval, you build another development. One of the things about the market is that the market can only absorb so much housing a year. This isn't the only housing happening in your community. And you only want to absorb so much new development. It has to make market sense. So there's an issue of timing there that matters. And what you're seeing unfold is sort of 8 to 10 development blocks that unfold over the fullness of time. What you're noticing here is the shed is still in the picture. And what you're also noticing there is there was a lot of open space for a very long time. And so we see the transformation of the place being gradual and evolutionary, not drastic and immediate. And that's an important part of growing a place. We can think we've got certain things figured out, but we're going to have to leave room for others to figure out things that we haven't thought about as they unfold over the course of time. And so that's an important thing about a master plan and an implementation strategy. It has to have a little bit of resilience to it. So 12 to 14 years, we're building something down there, and we're building something else. But it's not a project that's going to unfold in 3 to 4 years in its fullness. It will take longer. So summing up, a place to live, work, and play at the waterfront. A unique waterfront village focused around an active marina. That's the vision. Look forward to talking to you more about it. Thank you.